I'll tell you what I told the tribunal, and I'll tell it the same way. I went down to sublevel 9 to read a coolant gauge. That's all. Routine systems audit, Pellan station, refueling stop on the outer rim. 8 hours of work that nobody above the rank of maintenance coordinator would ever read. That's what I was doing when I found her. The door to corridor 9G had a standard access seal, but the seal was 9 months overdue for its certification check. That's the kind of thing I notice. I put my contractor's key against the panel and the door opened, which meant someone had been lazy about the override codes, and I stepped inside. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted. Not rot, nothing so obvious. Something more like a sealed terrarium, old air, and faint biological warmth, the way a place smells when something alive has been kept in it for a long time without enough ventilation. I moved my torch along the corridor wall and found the observation cell at the far end. A standard research cell, reinforced polymer viewport, locking mechanism on the outside. The kind you use when you need to contain something and don't want it to contain you back. She was sitting in the corner, small enough that I nearly missed her, knees drawn up, wrapped in what looked like a repurposed insulation blanket. Lavender grey skin, the color of a bruise healing. Silver eyes that caught my light and held it. She had the pointed ears of her species and a child's oversized eyes, and she looked at me the way a creature looks at you when it has been alone long enough that surprise is no longer possible, only a dull weighing of outcomes. I said, "Hey." The word came out of me before I thought about it. She didn't answer. She was very still. I looked at the cell panel. Specimen 7 Serin. It read. Status. Pending disposal. Assigned block. Vault 16 Research Annex Custodial Authority. Director H. Solek. I stood there for a moment reading that panel, and then I keyed the cell door open. She didn't run. That was the first thing that told me how long she'd been here. A child raised in enough open space runs toward a new person or away from one. Those are the options. She just sat and watched me walk in and crouch down beside her. I was careful to stay low, to not loom. I don't know where that instinct came from. It was just the right thing to do. I said, "I'm Corvin. I'm not going to hurt you." She looked at my hands. Then she looked at my face. Then she said, in a voice so small I almost didn't catch it, "They said my mother was resource expired." I didn't answer right away. I needed a second to make sure my face stayed level. "What's your name?" I asked, though I'd already read it on the panel. 7 Serin, she said. "That's not a name," I told her. "That's an inventory number. What do you want to be called?" She thought about it with the gravity of a child who has never been asked a question like that before. "Serin," she said finally. "Just Serin." "Serin it is." I had her in my arms. She weighed almost nothing, just a bundle of thin warmth, and was back in the corridor when the station's internal comm crackled and Director Halver Solek's voice came through, very calm, very precise, the voice of a man who has handled inconvenient situations before. "Mr. Mast, please return to the observation cell and resecure the specimen. You've accessed a classified research block." I kept walking. "Mr. Mast, I'm going to need your contractor badge surrendered to security by the time you reach the lift. This is a misunderstanding we can resolve without." I clicked the comm off. Serin had her face against my collarbone. I could feel her breathing, shallow and fast. I made myself breathe slow and even, the way you do when you want something small and frightened to understand that the immediate danger has passed. She was picking it up. I could feel her breathing begin to match mine. The lift doors opened on level 3 and 2 of Solek's security officers were waiting. Broad men in grey station uniforms, hands not quite at their sidearms. The older one, a flat-faced officer with a senior patch on his shoulder, stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to hand over the specimen." I looked at him. "Sir." He held his hands out, palms up. A practiced gesture, reasonable looking. "She's research property. You don't have clearance for this block. I'm asking you to let us handle this correctly." "She has a name," I said. The officer's hands stayed up. "Sir." "Her name is Serin." I held the child a little tighter. "And I'm not handing her to anyone." The younger officer moved to flank me. I turned enough to keep him in my sightline and said, very quietly, "I know exactly how wide this corridor is. I know which deck plating is loose under your left foot because I did the inspection on it 2 days ago. I know the nearest emergency override panel is 11 feet behind you, and I know the code for it, because I know the codes for every panel on this station. Don't make this complicated." He stopped. Solek came out of the cross corridor. He was a neat man, small and compact, silver-haired, the kind of administrator who has kept his hands clean for so long he's forgotten they could be otherwise. He looked at Seren with the expression of a man looking at a logistics problem. "Mr. Mast," he said, "I understand this seems distressing, but the research protocols governing Vault 16, IWC certified experimental exceptions. Specimen 7 is a product of sanctioned xenobiological development, not a child in any legal sense. You're holding station property." "She told me her name," I said. "Station property doesn't do that. The vocalizations are." "She told me her name," I said again, "and she asked me what happened to her mother. So we are going to the docking bay, and you're going to stay here." His expression shifted. Just slightly, the controlled irritation of a man who has run out of the softer tools. He nodded at his security officers and they spread out, and I understood then that we were past the part where anyone was pretending this was a misunderstanding. I turned and walked toward the emergency maintenance hatch at the end of the corridor. It's one of the things contractors know that station administrators don't. The maintenance routes are faster than the public corridors, and the emergency hatches open from either side. I had Seren against my chest with one arm and my contractor kit on my back, and I moved through those maintenance passages the way I'd moved through every other part of this station, because I knew them. I had mapped them. It was my job to know where everything was. She didn't make a sound. I could feel her heart going very fast, but she was quiet, absolutely quiet, and when I glanced down her face, her silver eyes were watching me with a focus that was almost unsettling, the focus of a child who has learned that silence is a survival tool. I said, softly, "Almost there." She pressed her forehead to my jaw. That was all. That was enough. I reached the secondary docking bay access panel with Solek's men 2 corridors behind me. I could hear them, not running yet, but moving quickly. I pulled my personal relay unit from my kit, the civilian-grade emergency transmitter that every licensed contractor carries, and I plugged Seren's biometric data directly from the cell panel download I'd taken in Corridor 9G full genetic sequence. 8 years of growth records. The vault logs, all of them, every file the station AI had pulled when I queried Specimen 7 Seren's records. I addressed the packet to the Interstellar Welfare Commission's Outer Rim Triage office and I sent it, and the relay unit blinked twice and confirmed transmission. Solek's voice came over the station-wide intercom. "Lock down the secondary docking bay. Contractor Mast is carrying restricted research assets." I keyed the bay door open with my contractor badge. It still worked, because Solek had been so focused on reaching me physically that he hadn't thought to pull my access remotely, and that was the kind of oversight that comes from running a facility where nobody has ever said no to you before. Inside the bay it was cold and smelled of engine wash and the particular silence of pressurized space. I found a storage alcove behind a fuel conduit and I sat down on the deck with Seren in my lap and my back to the wall, and I waited. She looked up at me. "Are they going to take me back?" "No," I said. "How do you know?" I thought about the transmission confirmation, the IWC triage flag, the 14 stations that relay would have already passed through. "Because I made it so they can't," I said. "Because your records are already somewhere Solek can't reach them. Because in about 6 hours a ship is going to dock here that answers to people he can't threaten." She was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother's name was Seren. I said the name back to her. I made sure I had it right. "She used to sing," Seren said. "In the cell. At night. I don't remember the words, but I remember the sound." I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. I just held on. Solek's men came to the bay door twice. Both times I had the door sealed from inside on the emergency mechanical lock, the kind that requires a cutting team to breach and takes 40 minutes minimum, and both times they eventually left. The third time they came, 6 hours and 11 minutes after I sent the transmission, the bay's external docking clamps engaged, and it wasn't Solek's team that came through. The IWC officer was a tall woman named Investigator Drea Cass. She walked in with 4 uniformed welfare officers at her back, and she looked at me sitting on the deck with Seren asleep in my arms, and she took in the whole of the bay, and she said, "Mr. Mast, we got your packet." "Good," I said. "Director Solek is claiming the child is research property under an experimental exception clause." "She has a name," I said. Seren. Her mother's name was Seren. That's in the vault records I sent you, the full intake manifest. I looked at investigator Cass steadily. Read the intake manifest and tell me what experimental exception covers what they did to Seren. Cass didn't answer. She'd clearly already read it. Solek certification, I said, was approved 8 years ago by someone who is now 3 promotions removed from the office that signed it. That office is not going to want to be associated with what's in those files. You know that. I know that, she said, quietly. Seren stirred. She opened her silver eyes and looked at investigator Cass, and then she looked at me, the weighing look, checking outcomes the way she'd learned to. I gave her the smallest nod. She looked back at Cass. My name is Seren, she said. Cass crouched down. She had the good sense to come to eye level. Hello, Seren, she said. That was the end of Vault 16. However, Solek lost his directorship before the week was out, and the experimental exception clause was referred to a review board that spent the next 2 years quietly dismantling 8 other facilities operating under the same certification. I gave my deposition to the tribunal 11 days after leaving Pelham Station. I told it the same way I've told it here. The first line of that deposition reads, "Her name is Seren." Everything else I said was just detail.